Brandon, the fallen tower. Brandon stood and stared. The South Tower was gone. Like some sort of awful magician's trick, it had just disappeared. Disappeared and been replaced by a mountain of concrete and twisted metal shrouded in a cloud of dust and smoke. That was what must have knocked them all down in the basement, Brandon realized. What had destroyed the underground mall. The tornado that had hit them was the blast from the South Tower coming down half a block away. Gail choked back a sob. All those people. Brandon felt all the relief from his escape drain out of him, replaced by an icy chill. Maybe people made it out, Richard said. If they had time. Brandon glanced at his watch. Its face was cracked, but the digital readout still worked. It was 10:25 a.m. It had been a little over an hour and a half since the first plane hit. How long after that had the second plane hit? He tried to remember. 15, 20 minutes? The people in the South Tower had had less than an hour to escape before the whole building had come down. Brandon looked up. The North Tower still poured black smoke into the sky above him. Brandon's father was up there at the top, in windows on the world. He was still alive. He had to be. The South Tower had fallen, incredibly, unbelievably, but the North Tower was still standing. Brandon had passed those firemen on the stairs. They would get to the fire and get to Brandon's dad. But if the South Tower had fallen... Oh my God, Pratik said. Look! Pratik pointed toward the middle of the North Tower. Mixed in with the falling metal and glass were things that were moving. People, Brandon realized. People were still jumping from the tower, falling 90 floors to their deaths. They dropped out of the thick black smoke that engulfed the top of the building with alarming speed, arms and legs flailing. Brandon saw one man reaching, grabbing as he fell, too far from anything to stop himself, his tie sticking straight up in the air above him. I need to find a phone booth, Brandon said, blinking away the nightmare. He turned to Richard. I need to call my dad. We need to get out of here first, Richard told him. Get to my house. We can call your dad from there. My family will be there. You can stay the night with us and... Well, we've got some things to work out, but you can stay with me and my family for as long as you need to. Brandon cried. He cried because Richard was being so nice to him. And because he didn't want to think about what would happen if his dad really did die in the North Tower. An EMT wearing a white surgical mask hurried up to Gail and took her by the elbow to sit her down on the curb. Another EMT ran over to Brandon, Richard, and Pratik and handed them little white masks like she and the other EMT wore. The masks were flimsy and thin and wrapped around your ears with an itchy elastic band, but they filtered the awful, gritty air. Don't breathe the dust, the EMT told them. It's toxic. The EMT found the bloody shirt wrapped around Brandon's hand. He stood like a zombie as she peeled it away and treated his wound. Brandon's eyes fell on a banged-up, cylindrical piece of machinery sitting right in the middle of the street. It was as tall as he was and looked like a crumpled soda can. Brandon struggled to grasp what he was seeing. Was that an airplane engine from one of the planes that had hit the Twin Towers? Could one of them have really shot out all this way? The EMT put something on Brandon's hand that made it sting, and he hissed in pain. She had it wrapped and bandaged in no time, though, and gave him a quick examination to see if there was anything else that needed patching. Can I move this to look at your other hand? She asked, pulling at something Brandon didn't know he was holding. Brandon looked down. In his left hand, he carried the little stuffed animal he'd picked up in the wreckage in the underground mall. It was the Tasmanian Devil, a character from the Warner Brothers cartoons. Brandon stared at the wild, silly look on its face. It was like something from another planet. One where airplanes didn't crash into buildings and skyscrapers didn't fall. Why was he still holding it? He'd been so focused on surviving that he hadn't even realized he'd picked it up and taken it with him. Richard put a hand on Brandon's shoulder. "You should keep that," Richard told him. "It brought us luck." Luck, thought Brandon. How could anybody think he'd been lucky? There was a sudden crack from high above, and somebody screamed. Brandon looked up. The tall red and white antenna on top of the North Tower was just visible, sticking out through the cloud of gray and black smoke that billowed from the upper floors. Brandon watched as the giant antenna tilted, leaned, and then disappeared down into the smoke as the top floor of the North Tower fell in on itself. Boom! 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 Brandon felt each boom in his stomach as the top floors of the North Tower collapsed, one by one, under the massive weight of each new falling floor. And then it was a rushing, expanding avalanche. Concrete crumbled to powder in an instant, exploding outward like a blooming flower, and giant pieces of rock and steel came shooting out like fireworks. The North Tower was coming down. "No, no, 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 no!" was all Brandon could say, all he could think. Then the sound of the individual floors collapsing became a rumble, a tidal wave, a static roar, and Brandon's heart stopped as he watched 107 stories, along with 500,000 tons of concrete and steel and moldy carpets and computers and human beings, come straight down. All around him, the cars on the street shuddered and bounced. The gray cloud from the tower expanded out, 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 and then the cloud of dust and rock and glass came blasting across the plaza and down the narrow streets between Manhattan's surviving skyscrapers like a living thing coming to swallow Brandon, like it had swallowed his father. "Run, Brandon!" Richard cried. "Run!" Brandon ran. He had never been so scared in all his life. Not when he had been trapped in the elevator, not when he had almost fallen off the edge of the 89th floor, not when he'd been battered and blind in the underground mall. The thing that had killed his father was coming for him, chasing him like a giant monster through the streets of Manhattan, and he ran in a wild panic down Vesey Street, straight away from the thing that hunted him. Car alarms went off all around him, honking, beeping, flashing, like they were yelling at him to run, run, run. Then the sun went out in the sky, and darkness surrounded him, and the air turned to ash in his mouth, despite his white mask. "I'm going to die," Brandon thought. He was just at a little old church called St. Paul's, halfway down the long block to Broadway, when the full force of the blast caught up to him. Whoomph! The wind picked Brandon up and threw him down the street as though he weighed no more than a leaf. Brandon tumbled, skidded, bounced, rolled. Everything was a blur of asphalt and ash and pain, and then he slammed into a honking car and bounced off, sliding to a stop in the middle of the street. Brandon wrapped his battered arms around his chest and tucked his head down as the monster roared over him, past him. Paper and ash fluttered in its wake, and then it was gone, and Brandon lay alone in the street, covered from head to foot in white dust. Brandon's arms and legs shook as he got up on all fours to look around. Everything was covered in another coat of fine white dust, including the lump of a body that lay in the street a few yards back. "Richard?" Brandon cried. Brandon stood, staggered, limped back to the unmoving form, his feet leaving drag marks in the soot and ash. Manhattan was quiet again, silent as a grave. That's what this place was now, a giant grave for the thousands of people who hadn't been able to escape before the towers fell. Brandon just prayed Richard hadn't joined them. Brandon fell to his knees next to the body of his friend. Richard lay face down on the road, motionless, Brandon put a hand to Richard's back and shook him gently. "Richard," he whispered. "Richard, please be alive." Brandon couldn't take it if Richard had died too. Richard's fingers twitched, and his arm slid out across the ash-covered asphalt, looking for something. Brandon didn't know what Richard was looking for, but he was alive. Richard was alive. Brandon put his hand in Richard's, and Richard squeezed it. Richard relaxed then, stopped looking for whatever he'd been looking for. And Brandon took Richard's hand in both of his and wept, the tears carving tracks down the white dust that covered his face. Because Brandon knew then what Richard had been looking for when he'd put his arm out. He had just wanted to know, like Brandon, that his friend was all right and that they were together.
Rashmina, 9/11. Rashmina blinked awake in the bright sunshine. She lay on the ground by the river, near the fields with their corn and barley and rice that had yet to be harvested. Her ears rang and her body ached, but she was alive. So was her mother, who was sitting by her side. Her mother wrapped Rashmina up in a hug so tight it hurt. "That was a very brave and very foolish thing you did," Moore told her. Taz stood behind them both, smiling. "What happened?" Rashmina asked him. "A big boom," Taz told her. "That wall you hid behind took the worst of it. The mine blew a hole in the outer wall just big enough for us all to climb through. Too tight for me to make it with my battle belt on, though. The belt he had worn with all the pouches on it was gone, and he tucked his thumbs into his beltless pants. Had to leave it behind. One more artifact for the shrine to failed conquerors, Rashmina thought. She sat up suddenly. "What about the others? Zaire, Marzia, Anna?" "They're all right," Rashmina's mother told her, and Rashmina saw now that there were other American and Afghan soldiers among them, treating the survivors for cuts and bruises. Taz was bandaged up, too. Rashmina put a hand to her aching head. How long had she been out? "Your eyes," Rashmina said to Taz. He was cleaned up and looking directly at her, and for the first time she saw that his eyes were a brilliant blue. "Oh, yeah," he said with a smile. "I'm beginning to see the light." Anna, Marzia, and Zaire crowded around her. Rashmina's grandmother, sister, and brother squeezed her hands and touched their heads to hers. "Baba!" Zaire cried, waving at someone behind Rashmina. Her heart leaped and she turned. Coming around the bend in the road was her father, along with other men from the village. Baba was alive? Marzia and Zaire ran to hug him, and after Rashmina was able to get to her feet, she and her mother followed. "Baba! I was so worried about you," Rashmina cried, giving him a hug. "And you, Mina John. We couldn't find you, but then we heard the explosion." Baba looked around. "Where is Passoon?" Rashmina felt the blood drain away from her face. Passoon. Had he been with the Taliban during the gunfight? Was his body lying on a hillside somewhere, filled with American bullets? "Passoon went to the Taliban," she told her father. Baba sagged against his crutch. "Yes, I worried he might." "I tried to stop him, Baba. I followed him. Tried to talk him out of it." Rashmina fought back her tears. "Nothing I said would change his mind." Baba put a hand on her head. "I know, Mina John, I know." "I wanted to do the right thing," Rashmina said. "But all I did was lead everyone to their deaths. Everyone in the village is dead because of me." No, Mina John," Baba said. "Come and see." He took her by the hand and led her around the bend, where dozens of villagers had come out of the front entrance to the cave. The cave-in had only separated Rashmina and the others from the rest of the villagers, not killed everyone on the other side. A few died, yes, Baba told her. To God we belong, and to God we return. But many more survived, and thanks to you. Rashmina buried her face in her father's tunic to hide her tears. We are safe now, Baba said. The Americans are clearing the village of the last of the Taliban. Rashmina turned around. Taz had been standing off to the side, and now 3 more American soldiers came over to join him. One of them playfully swatted the little brown stuffed animal strapped to Taz's vest. The white strip on the soldier's vest said his name was Carter. He wore his body armor over a jacket with the sleeves cut off, and Rashmina saw the word infidel tattooed on one of his muscular arms. Infidel was what the Mujahideen called anyone who didn't follow Islam. Carter shook his head. What a mess, huh, Taz? I know, said Taz, and today of all days. Oh, Carter said. Right. Geez. Rashmina remembered Taz saying that exact same thing when she'd first brought him home. What do you mean? She asked him. Today of all days. Today's 9/11, Taz said. Like that meant something. I don't understand, Rashmina told him. 9/11, Taz said. 9 for the month, 11 for the day, September 11th. Today's the anniversary of the attack on the World Trade Center. Rashmina shook her head. I don't know what that is. Are you serious? Taz asked. The Twin Towers? The airplanes? Rashmina still had no idea what he was talking about. Taz frowned, and he and Carter shared a confused look. How could you not know about 9/11? Carter asked Rashmina. He was almost angry about it. 9/11 it's the whole reason I'm here, Taz told Rashmina. The whole reason any of us are here. He ripped open another Velcro pouch on his vest and pulled out 2 pieces of paper. One was a thin, glossy page from a magazine. It showed a photograph of 2 gray rectangular buildings, each twice as tall as the other buildings around them. Black smoke poured from both, blowing sideways in the wind. Behind the buildings was bright blue, cloudless sky like today. Taz showed her the picture, like it should mean something to her. But it didn't. She'd never seen these buildings in her entire life. She's a kid, said Carter. She just hasn't learned about it in school yet, he told Taz. But when Taz showed the picture to Moore and Baba, they'd never heard of 9/11 either. Neither had Anna, nor an elderly couple who'd been with them in the cave. Baba called the other villagers over, but none of them knew what 9/11 was, or why the Americans were so angry about it. That's the World Trade Center in New York City, Taz told them, tapping the photo. He was scowling now. He looked a little like Passoon when he was angry, Rashmina thought. Terrorists flew 2 planes into the Twin Towers, 1 into each building. 3,000 people died in the attacks. My dad died in the attacks. Your father? Rashmina said. Taz showed Rashmina the other photo he carried. This one of a man and a boy in nice clothes, a father and son. The father had a broad chest, brown skin, and a nice smile, just like Taz. The little boy in the picture had high cheekbones, brown hair, and blue eyes, also like Taz. I was there that day, Taz said, in the North Tower. I made it out, but my dad didn't. Beside him, Carter looked at Taz with a kind of reverence, almost awe. Taz traced his fingers over the man in the photo. That's him, my dad, Leo Chavez. He worked in a restaurant all the way at the top of the North Tower. Chavez? Rashmina repeated. Your name is Lowry. Taz nodded. That's my adopted name. I took it in honor of the guy who helped me get out of the towers. He adopted me a year later, Richard Lowry. My name's Brandon Lowry now. We just call him Taz, said Carter. Rashmina looked again at the photos. If someone had done this to her village, to her Baba, she would feel the same anger, the same sadness. She explained the pictures to her family and the other villagers in Pashto, and they nodded with understanding. So it is Badal then. That is why they are here, Anna said. Rashmina sighed. The Americans didn't follow Pashtunwalai, but apparently revenge was something they knew and practiced as well. And who could blame them? Afghans did this to you? Rashmina said sadly. The Taliban? Taz shifted and looked uncomfortable. Well, no, he admitted. It wasn't the Taliban. The men who flew the planes into the buildings, they were mostly from Saudi Arabia, a group called Al-Qaeda. But the Taliban hated America and the West as much as Al-Qaeda did, Taz explained. The Taliban let Al-Qaeda set up their terrorist headquarters here. The Al-Qaeda leader, Osama bin Laden, he planned the September 11 attacks right here in Afghanistan. Taz glanced around. The Taliban government wouldn't hand bin Laden over to the U.S., so we invaded. Rashmina's anger flared like a brush fire. Wait, she said. This Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, they destroyed these buildings, killed 3,000 people. That is terrible, unforgivable. The curse of God and all his angels, and of the whole people upon them. She spat on the ground. But how many more of our buildings have you destroyed in return? How many more Afghan people have you killed? Taz was quiet. Beside her, Rashmina's family looked on with concern. She knew they didn't comprehend her words, but they could hear the anger and confrontation in them. You said yourself, Rashmina continued. Afghans did not do this attack. You are seeking revenge against the wrong people. Did you find and kill this man, this Osama bin Laden? Yes, Taz said quietly. When? Almost 10 years ago, in Pakistan. Then why are you here? Rashmina asked again. Hey, if you're not with us, you're against us, Carter said. Taz looked away, and Rashmina waited. Did Taz agree with his friend? Or was his answer still, we're here because we're here? What kind of excuse was that when people on both sides were dying, when Elah was dead? So if the United States does to my country what this Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda did to yours, Rashmina asked, does that mean Afghanistan now gets to invade your country in retaliation for your attack? Carter laughed. What? No. Of course not, Rashmina said bitterly, because the rules are different for the United States. You make your own rules. Damn right we do, said Carter. Rashmina looked at Taz, but he knew it. The walkie-talkie on Carter's body armor squawked to life. Carter, this is Pacheco, the voice on the other end said. We've got a house at the top of the village with at least 5 insurgents holed up inside it. No civilians in range. Over. Carter held a button on his walkie-talkie and stepped away to respond, but Rashmina could hear what he said. Acknowledged. Pull back, and I'll call in a bird. Over. Carter waited a moment, then spoke into his walkie-talkie again. Base, this is Carter. We need a strike on a building with at least 5 insurgents in it. Pacheco will call in coordinates. Over. In moments, Rashmina heard the familiar thrum of an incoming Apache. Womp, 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 womp. The helicopter thundered up along the river and hovered right over their heads. Everyone ducked and backed away from the downdraft, and a second later came the hiss and whoosh of a single missile streaking out from under the metal grasshopper's wings. The missile struck a house at the top of the village, and it exploded in a burst of fire and rock. Rashmina let out a breath. It was over now, right? Suddenly, there was a loud crack, and Rashmina watched in horror as the house beneath the shattered building crumbled and fell. The house underneath that collapsed under the weight of the first two, and the demolished buildings took out the next house, and the next, and the next, until the whole village became one great avalanche, falling down on itself. Carter cursed and turned to everyone standing around watching. "Run! Get across the river!" he cried. The villagers ran from the landslide into the fields. Taz ran with Rashmina and her family. When they were safe, they all turned and watched as the village slid down into nothing, swallowed by a great brown cloud of dust that came roaring at them like a lion. The helicopter hovered a moment more, then lifted away. Its blades churned the smoke and dust as it left, and through a brief gap in the cloud, Rashmina saw the empty hillside where her village had once been. Everything she had ever known was gone. "Dadgum," Carter said. "Bombed 'em back up to the Stone Age." He clapped Taz on the shoulder. "That's for 9/11, Carter added. Carter and the other American soldiers headed back across the river while Taz waited behind. "Rashmina, I'm sorry," Taz said. He looked horrified. That was not supposed to happen. "And yet, it did," Rashmina said. "I'm sorry," Taz said again, and he left to join his people. Rashmina's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees. Around her, the other villagers cried out and sobbed. If the Americans had named their helicopters Apaches for some tribe they had defeated in battle, Rashmina thought, they should call their next helicopters Afghans, because the United States had surely destroyed Afghanistan.